Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love what you see here today and everything is for sale, reach out to me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. If you wish to buy, we have all details, including pricing. I don't always put pricing in the description because sales doesn't always let me, but I have all the answers if you reach out. And if you wish to sell or trade a watch, we are always buying. Reach out to me at tmosso at thewatchbox.com to buy, trade, or sell a watch. Let's jump straight in with a watch that I promised you in the thumbnail, Rolex Daytona. So this is the latest generation. Hard to believe it came out in 2016. That is quite a ways away at this point, but the timepiece has had remarkable stability as we have almost all of the original features from the first automatic winding Daytona in 1988. The first really obvious change as we explore this variant is going to be the ceramic bezel. Otherwise, case size, dial layout, water resistance, chronometer certification, outboard tachymeter, not a whole lot has changed. Therefore, it doesn't really matter when a version of the Daytona comes out because more than any other Rolex model line, its design appears to be immune to planned obsolescence and succession. Taking a quick look at the watch on the wrist, you can see it's about 12.2 millimeters thick, so very slim, 40 millimeters in diameter, short from lug to lug. This is definitely a watch a man or a woman can wear, and I've seen both wear it successfully. 100 meters water resistant, 72-hour automatic winding power reserve, chronometer certified, anti-magnetic, water resistant, shock resistant, vertical clutch, column wheel chronograph, all of that on the Rolex Oyster bracelet. And the Oyster really is the best match for this watch because the rugged three-link design and sporting intent is a perfect match for the Motorsports-inspired chronograph, and the Rolex Daytona to this day is the winner's gift for the winning driver in each car, in each class of the Rolex 24 Hours of Daytona. So 4 drivers to a car, that car wins its class, each one walks away with the most coveted trophy in motorsports. Let's do a quick lume shot here, and you can see that the watch uses Rolex's proprietary Chromolite blue lume. Now this is the white dial version, there's also a black one. This seems to be the more popular of the two, as I've seen more of these and people seem more keen to accumulate them. The bezel, along with the sapphire, highly scratch resistant, helping to shield the rest of the watch from the blows that knocks in daily life can inflict on a timepiece. Now, we're not quite done with the Daytona because I've got a very different kind of cosmograph right here. I talked about the Oyster bracelet giving it a sporty look, but if you wanted to dress up your Daytona, make it a little bit more formal, well, one way to do that is to add Arabic numerals, a lovely cream satin dial, tone-on-tone counters, a white gold case, and a Rolex factory clasp and factory strap. Now you can see the watch is the same size. Not much has changed in that regard. The timepiece, still 40 millimeters in diameter, still just a little over 12 millimeters thick. Now without the end links of the bracelet, even shorter across the wrist. This is a more upscale, more mature, more refined take on the Daytona, but still has the same tech specs as the other watch, as well as 100-meter water resistance. So if you want to put this on an Everest strap or a rubber B, you're going to find that it is just as swimmable as the steel watch we just saw. Now getting a little bit closer, there's a lot to love here as we have these applique white gold radially arrayed Arabic numerals. You can see the watch is well loomed. It too features blue chromolite. The timepiece, which is Rolex reference 116519, has the same tech specs inside. It's the same Rolex caliber 4130 movement. And on the dial side, we've got quite a bit. We have this cream or champagne colored primary dial, which has a lovely pebble-like, almost sandpaper-like grit to it. We have the black registers, each with a polished chapter ring, and then a few well-chosen red highlights. You can see here that we have a tachymeter scale that is white gold to match the case, and Rolex, because it controls its own foundry and makes its own alloys, it uses what's called gray gold in the industry, a white alloy that's white all the way through, never needs to be rhodium plated, and if scratched, doesn't show another color beneath. So this is a really cool watch and a very different look for the Daytona. It's also a highly sought variant. That's a Z series watch, by the way. Now, let's say you want to shoot the moon with your sports chronograph. You want to go way upscale. Well, for 2021, Audemars Piguet redesigned the Royal Oak chronograph. What were the changes? Well, the dial was reconfigured primarily to give it 3 symmetrical registers rather than the shrunken sub-seconds that we had from 2017 forward. But this is the 2022 model, technically dimensionally identical, but what really changes is on the reverse side, where you get this 1-year-only Royal Oak half-century commemorative rotor. You can see how many sharp interior angles there are where bevels meet. This is a higher level of finish than you get on a standard Royal Oak rotor. Note that the rotor itself is both black polished on the numerals and satinated across its top. There is a satination across its top. There's beveling on each edge as well as the interior edges. You can see the column wheel of the movement is visible and black polished on the reverse side. We also have a vertical clutch, which gives it refinement that you normally associate with a vertical clutch, like smoother engagement. We're just not used to seeing the vertical clutch. And if you look, you can actually see it moving just below my finger. A visible vertical clutch is a rare commodity. This is the new movement. Previously, the Royal Oak Chronos would have included a Philippe Piguet 1185, which is a sub 26 millimeter movement. Well, this movement, caliber 4401, is over 30 millimeters in diameter. Not only does it better fill the case back, but on this generation of the Royal Oak Chronograph, we get a display case back so we can actually see the movement for the first time. There's a full balance bridge and a free sprung index for greater shock tolerance than on the Philippe Piguet. We get flyback functionality, reset and restore at the chronograph. The timepiece features a 70-hour power reserve, which is up from the old 40. So just about everything has been redesigned and upgraded on this watch. And if you can't tell well from the camera, it is a blue dial. We've had a black dial version of this watch on the show recently. This is the blue dial model. It's a large watch. I would say, honestly, it wears more like a 43 millimeter timepiece. There's really no reason to step up to an offshore if you just want the wrist presence. This can go toe-to-toe with the bigger sports watch. Where this watch has the advantage is in the fact that it is much thinner, at only 12.5 millimeters thick, but have just as much wrist presence as the 43 millimeter Royal Oak Offshore or the 42 millimeter Royal Oak Offshore. This has just as much stance, just as much gravitas. Unless you really want the 100 to 300 meter water resistance of an offshore, stick with this one. By the way, the bracelet is beautifully made. Speaking of beautifully made bracelets, I've got a great one here. Now, the original Patek Philippe Nautilus 5726 annual calendar came out at Baselworld 2010. Well, in 2019, Patek Philippe launched what you see here, which is the 5726/1A-014, the first Nautilus annual calendar to have the blue gradient dial from the 5711. So we have that blue dial here. Traditionally, the Nautilus annual calendar featured either a silver white or a gray gradient dial. Hands and indices, of course, are white gold. Despite the through fittings, the little pushers for adjusting the calendar, the watch is still 120 meters water resistant. You can see there's no shortage of looms. This is a real sports watch. The timepiece is about 11.5 millimeters thick, and it is 40.5 millimeters in diameter, but the feel in the hand is substantial. You can see and you can feel that this is a more ruggedly constructed watch than the 5711 or even the 5712. And although it is a sports watch, and there's no doubt about that, it has a relatively low stance and a sloped case flank, so it will fit underneath a cuff or a sleeve. The timepiece features an annual calendar, which Patek Philippe invented back in 1996. It's a calendar that only needs to be corrected once a year during the jump from February to March. We have an aperture-style calendar. We have a moon phase with a adjustment interval of 122 years, so it actually has a longer interval than the rest of the calendar. And then there's a 24-hour dial. So in general, you just don't want to try to set the calendar between 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. That's when you don't want to use these little pusher adjusters on the side. It uses a version of caliber 324, which is a handsome movement that balances hand finishing with relative production, well, at least volume production by Patek Philippe standards. But compared to something from JLC or Audemars Piguet, the standard of finishing you get here is far higher. It has a 45-hour automatic winding power reserve, 6-position adjustment, Gyromax style free-sprung balance, anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, and not only is it pretty, but Patek Philippe attests that it will run no worse than -3 + 2 seconds per 24 hours as delivered from the factory. But that watch is expensive. Let's talk about something a little bit more affordable. As the market deflates a bit and people become more realistic about their expectations for their next watch purchase, a lot of folks are looking for undiscovered value. And I think that exists in Cartier timepieces from the 2000s, such as the Ballon Bleu and also the Roadster. And the Roadster, launched in 2002, is probably the Cartier timepiece that men most frequently mention to me as their most anticipated and desired reissue model. We've seen reissues of Cartier watches from the classical period. We've seen reissues of the Panthère from the 1980s. Well, it looks like this is the watch that male watch buyers wish for Cartier to re-release next, but you can't beat the original. This is the Roadster Large in steel. It's about 37 millimeters across, not including the crown structure. It's very thin at under 10 millimeters thick. It is 44.2 millimeters from lug tip to lug tip, and it's about 52.5 millimeters from end link to end link. Now, the timepiece is designed to recall the imagery of sports cars from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and the first place you see that is in the layout of the dial. It is closest, in my opinion, to certain Porsche 356 models, the 1950s. So you've got that automotive dashboard instrument-like layout, and then you can see the case itself. It's almost like you're looking at fenders with Frenched taillights, the way the bolts are recessed into the caseband, and then you've got bumper overriders and tail lamp profiles that you can envision as the inspiration for the crown structure, which merges perfectly with the magnifier for the date. The watch is easy to wear on a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference, and I normally don't say that when a watch is almost 53 millimeters from end link to end link. Now, this watch introduced a quick release lug system that has been used on other Richemont brand watches, for example, IWC. And there are many options available through Cartier. If you wish to swap this to a strap, for example, Cartier uses screws that are pivoted in their center. So they're pivoted at the hip to allow the bracelet to move in a sort of serpentine side-to-side fashion to make it feel more supple and luxurious on the wrist. I don't know of any other brands that use pivoted screws, so it's an unusual construction, but it shows the degree of attention to detail they placed in this watch. Removable links are fixed by screws. You can see that there's a little bit of a channel down the center, satin-finished center links, then polished outer links. It is very easy to put the whole thing back. It's just like a car seat belt. You snap it back in, and there it's attached. Now, it is a sports watch. The watch is automatic winding. It does feature luminescence, as you could see. It is well lumed, and that is the whole dial, including the numerals. And it's 100 meters water resistant. Inside, a tried and true, thin and reliable ETA 289282, 42-hour power reserve, automatic winding, stop seconds, quick set date. And this is really the Roadster to own. It's the perfect size. It's the iconic dial. And frankly, while I like the chronographs, I feel like less is more. Less busy and truer to the design inspiration. This is straight off of the Porsche dashboard and onto your wrist. A very cool value play from one of the truly great brands in watchmaking that will be around forever to service it and provide parts. And hell, it might even be reissued someday, and then you can say you own the original. Speaking of the original, does this remind you of anything? Yeah. I thought so. Patek Philippe 57DP. And in 2011, Girard-Perregaux reasoned that there are only so many 57DPs to go around, so it launched this. The 1966 Chronograph, 40 millimeters in white gold with a sunburst blue gradient dial. The timepiece perfectly channels the essential aesthetic of Patek Philippe's famous 2000s era chronograph. So if you remember the 1 year only 2008 to 2009 5070p, you could see where the inspiration came from. And GP's brooking no obstruction or subterfuge here. They know exactly where this inspiration came from, but it's beautifully made in its own right. The lugs are welded on. This is a very traditional and laborious case construction method. They're not machined, they're not stamped. The case and the lugs are built separately. They're inserted slot to slot, welded together, and then all evidence of the weld is removed by hand. So this is an extensively hand-finished case, and it is a lot more compact than the 42 millimeter 5070. In fact, it's under 46 millimeters from lug to lug. It's 12.3 millimeters thick. It's 40 millimeters across. And it bears the distinction of using an in-house movement. This is based on the Girard-Perregaux 3300 automatic. Thin, fine, high horology, potentially very accurate when well regulated. It's a unidirectional winder with a 46-hour power reserve, a 4 Hz beat rate, a stop seconds function, and a vertical clutch chronograph module added on top. You can see that there is a tachymeter scale, And the tachymeter scale is used for gauging the speed of something, apparently going very, very fast, unless you're good with mental decimals. And on the dial side, you can see we do have that gradient. It's darker at the edge than at the center. Not too many folks were doing gradient blue dials back in 2011, so in that respect, Girard-Perregaux was a little bit ahead of the curve. We have 2 sunken sub-registers, then all applied steel rhodium-plated indices and by Arabic numerals. We have a white gold single-fold deployant clasp to match. A very attractive watch from one of the great high horology brands. Here we have a company that is fast establishing itself as a high horology brand of reference. Now, of course, what we call Bulgari today is, properly speaking, a 2000s era shopping spree by Bulgari the jeweler to accumulate dial makers, case makers, bracelet and clasp manufacturers, and most importantly, the combined manufacturer of Girard-Perregaux and Daniel Roth timepieces in the Vallée du Jeu. And Daniel Roth and Girard-Perregaux became manufacturer Bulgari, and that's where watches like this Bulgari Octo Finissimo Chronograph GMT come from. 42 millimeters in titanium. The watch is only 7.1 millimeters thick, and it arrived, as you see here, back in 2019. The timepiece uses a second time zone positioned at 3 o'clock. It looks almost like it's part of the chronograph, but you see how I'm able to jump the local hour. So I'm adjusting my local time, and then when I pull the crown out, the first thing you'll note is, unlike the Octo Finissimo automatic, this watch has hacking seconds. But now I set that 24-hour second dial. So for example, I set it to 8 in the morning, and then I resume the operation of my watch. I can set my local time zone to whatever I like. So for example, 4 in the afternoon. The watch has a dial that's made of titanium, a case and a bracelet made of titanium. A pusher adjuster adjusts your local time. We have a little ceramic cabochon on top of the double knurled crown. The watch does include a column wheel for exceptionally crisp and satisfying feel. You can see on the reverse side that through a skeletonized access port in the bridge, the column wheel is visible, and Bulgari could easily have taken the BVL 138 micro rotor automatic movement from the Octo Finissimo automatic and placed a chronograph module on top of that. It would still have been reasonably thin, and they could have saved themselves some money and homogenized the models. Instead, they took the BVL 288, which was the peripheral rotor movement from the automatic tourbillon, and so they created this, the BVL 318, which is only 3.3 millimeters thick. There's a platinum rotor outboard that winds a 60-hour power reserve, and then what happened was there was a space in the middle where the tourbillon drive would have been. Bulgari inserted the chronograph mechanism into the donut hole in the middle of the peripheral rotor automatic, resulting in a movement that is no thicker than it was before. It's a combination of hand and mechanical finishing that comes across extremely accomplished, and I would compare it favorably to Audemars Piguet. That is the quality of what you're getting here. The watch is larger than the original Octo Finissimo. You don't notice the thickness so much as the size. At 42 millimeters, it is a larger timepiece. Keep in mind that there's a 100-meter water-resistant version of this watch. That one is 43 millimeters and over 9 millimeters thick. This watch is smaller than that and lighter in every regard, so don't confuse the two in terms of fit. I would say if you can wear the original 40 millimeter Octo Finissimo automatic, you can wear this, but I would not necessarily say that if you can wear that original, you can wear the 43 water-resistant watch. This is 30 meters, so while it is a sporty watch, it's more of a high and dry sporty watch. Lots of attention to detail here. You could see that there's a folding clasp, which you might not see if you've only seen photos online. Let me see how well I can zoom in on this. But inside the bracelet, there's this little recess for the clasp. So when you fold the clasp shut, it nestles inside the bracelet, and the result is no thicker than the links of the bracelet. So that is how they thin out the bracelet even when the clasp is closed. It is very, very impressive. Now I showed you a big Royal Oak. I'm going to show you a smaller one. This is a Mid to late 1990s, Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Automatic 14800 in steel. It's something we rarely see, partly because the case shape is so unconventional. It has a hybrid Royal Oak and tonneau profile, where you can see it's designed expressly for this type of strap junction. So on the underside, you'll note the strap includes a clinching system, a combination of metal brackets and screws that allows it to be inserted into a little revetment in the case flank and then locked in place. You can see that, like the original Royal Oak, it uses a monoblock case construction, so the case back and the mid case are all machined out of a single solid. You can also see from the depth of the engraving and the definition of the satination on the case back that this watch has been rarely, if ever, refinished. You can also see by the sharpness of the bevels that the watch is in outstanding condition. Now, I particularly love the fact that the bevel here wraps around the outer face of the lug, so you can see it's a wraparound polished bevel. Very impressive stuff. The crown is screwed down, the water resistance is 50 meters. The dial is blue, and it is a blue hobnail. Back when this watch was made in the 90s, that hobnail was cut on a pantograph, not at Audemars Piguet, but at a company called Stern Frère, which had origins in the hands of the Sterns, who founded Stern Frère and then used its revenues to buy Patek Philippe in 1932. So this watch has inside a JLC 89 based movement, outside an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak case and bezel, and then a dial made by Stern Frère. So how many companies are combined in this single 36.5 millimeter watch? A stunning number. Taking a quick look at the watch, you can see that the dial rapidly fades, as this is an old tritium watch face, and you can see even as I've been talking, the luminescence has diminished considerably. The hands are almost dead already. Just something to be aware of. This is an older watch, so if you need it to, quote, glow, it's not necessarily going to work out as planned. And we're back with yet another sports watch, larger this time, though clearly inspired by the same era that birthed the Royal Oak and the Nautilus. Have you guessed? No? How about now? Launched in 2019, 44 millimeters in DLC black grade 5 titanium. This is the Girard-Perregaux Laureato Absolute chronograph. So the Laureato Absolute is to the Laureato what the offshore is to the Royal Oak. There's a lot to love in detail, and a few of them can be seen on the dial. First, take a look at the hands. You'll note that they're mirror polished on their outer facets, but they're satinated across their top. Look at the counterweight of the seconds hand. It's either perfectly matched to the shape of the hour hand, depending on how you want to look at it, or it is 1/2 of a Girard-Perregaux golden bridge structure. The dial is a blue gradient metallic. You can see it's darker at the edge than at the center. And there's actually a dial-on-dial construction. You can see the sub-registers are the lower dial, which is black, and then we have a stenciled top dial, which sits above that lower dial and creates a depth effect. You can also see that there are mirrored inserts at the bottom of each hour index. And then we have a lovely case that gives way to a strap that is injection molded with a blue contrast to a black base. It's very subtle. We have here a double deployant, or I should say single deployant clasp with double triggers. And this single folding clasp has a clever size adjustment feature internally. You can see I push that trigger, and then I can change the anchoring slide right here. So if I need to fine-tune my fit, I have the ability to do that inside of this clasp, which, like the rest of the watch, is grade 5 titanium. It's 300 meters water resistant, and impressively, on the reverse side, you can see that there is a fairly accurate conversion from meters to feet. Most companies just equate 300 meters with 1,000 feet. Not the case. Girard-Perregaux is at least trying to do the right thing. Now, the watch being highly water resistant, you can wear it all the time, and it's a great summer 2022 watch. On my wrist, you can see that the shape of the case, which has a little bit of a downward slope, arcs around the edge of my wrist, so you can actually wear this on a fairly small wrist. I think a 15 centimeter circumference wrist should wear it well. My wrist is 16, and I've still got some room to spare here. That is to say, the lugs aren't overlapping the edge of my wrist. It's 14.8 millimeters thick, so neither super thick nor particularly thin. Inside, we have a Girard-Perregaux 3300 base movement. Technically speaking, it's a lot like the 40 millimeter 1966 chronograph we saw earlier. Automatic winding, 46-hour power reserve, 4 hertz beat rate. It is a modular chronograph, so it has 63 joules. That's why the joule count is so high. It features stop seconds, as well as a quick set date and a seamless vertical clutch for engagement. This is a fun watch to wear. It has better high horology chops than something like an Hublot Big Bang, but it doesn't have the expense or the brand baggage of an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak offshore. Let's take a detour into the world of dress watches real quick, and perhaps an unexpected high horology option from Cartier. Following the discontinuation of the CP collection in 2008, Cartier embarked on a high horology spending spree, developing a huge range of complications and even investing in Geneva hallmark watchmaking by creating additional capacity at Roger Dubuis in Geneva. And that's how this Rotonde Cartier tourbillon managed to earn the Geneva hallmark, despite the fact that Cartier's manufacturer is located in La Chaux-de-Fonds. Now you can see right here, there is a Geneva hallmark stamp on this caliber 9453. The movement is a flying tourbillon. You can see the tourbillon has no upper bridge on the front to block your view. Take a look at the beautiful interior bevels of this dial structure. Note that the movement itself and the dial are effectively one and the same. Take a look at the steel components of the keyless works and the motion works. You can see that the edge is beveled all the way around the steel components. We have an open barrel, a 50-hour power reserve, and the watch does justice to the standards of the Poisson de Genève. Of course, the movement was designed by Cartier but built by Roger Dubuis in order to get the Geneva seal. And this watch is number 36 of a 100-piece limited edition, 45 millimeters in rose gold. You throw it on the wrist. It's comfortable. It's large, there's no doubt. I probably wouldn't wear it on a wrist any smaller than mine. That is to say, if your wrist is my size, and I'll zoom out so you can see it better in proportion. If your wrist is my size, you're going to wear it just fine. And it is a thin watch, only 12.4 millimeters thick. But this is a timepiece that's going to overlap your wrist if it's any smaller than 16 centimeters in circumference. That's okay, though, because I have other options for you. Getting a little bit smaller, I measure from bezel edge to bezel edge 42.2 millimeters for this Vacheron Constantin, and it is the originally launched Patrimony Traditionnel chronograph. So right here you can see it has the Traditionnel set of Dauphine hands. Patrimony and the Traditionnel are now separate in the catalog. The hands are Dauphine and half frosted for better contrast against the dial base. Hands as well as applique indices have been meticulously satinated, black polished, and faceted to show some contrast and twinkle like cut gems. And of course, all of that hardware is made of white gold on this dial. The case is made of white gold. This model debuted at SIHH in 2009. On the reverse side, we have a Vacheron Constantin modified Le Mans 2310. So this is a very traditional, big, slow beat, column wheel, lateral clutch chrono. As the Omega 321, it went to the moon. It is from that very family of Le Mans chronograph calibers. Now there's some standout features here. You can see the finish is of a much higher standard than the Le Mans Abauche. You can also see that the watch uses an overcoil hairspring, whereas the standard Le Mans would use a flat hairspring. Another important feature is the use of a hairspring impact guard. If you look carefully, you can see there's what appears to be a little gold wire running from the escape wheel bridge to the balance cock, and that little wire, which sits directly beneath the regulator, is there to prevent the overcoil hairspring from hooking on the regulator in the event that the watch should be shocked. It's a very old school feature you'll see on some 1960s Daytonas, but infrequently anywhere else. Now you can see all the chronograph components are steel. All of the bridges and plates are rhodium plated brass. The finishing on the steel is particularly impressive because it's been satinated across its top, but it's been mirror beveled on the edge, the same as the brass. Brass is a much softer material and easier to finish. So it's impressive to see the same standard of beveling on steel and brass here. Big, slow 18K beat rate, power reserve, manual wind 48 hours, and some of the best column wheel feel you will ever have the pleasure to enjoy. You can see the watch includes a double deployant white gold clasp. Throw it on the wrist. It's broad, flat, and has presence. Now, this size of dress chronograph was all the rage back in the 2000s, and today, as you'll see on the Corne de Vache, reference 5000 from Vacheron, modern haute horlogerie chronographs, even from the same brand, are much smaller. So if you have a taste for larger watches or a big wrist that makes modern dress watches look mini, this is going to be the option for you. We can get a little bit smaller though. At 40.5 millimeters in rose gold, this is the Lange und Söhne Richard Lange. So this is a watch that came out in the mid-2000s. It's a very simple three-hand chronometry-focused timepiece, so named after Richard Lange, scientist, inventor, and watchmaker. It features the Roman numerals. When you see stick indices on a Lange, that means Saxonia. When you see Arabic numerals, that's the 1815. When you see Roman numerals, That's the Richard Lange. Now turn it all over, and you can see this is the caliber 0412, and it's only got a 36 to 38 hour power reserve, but it has a complex stop seconds mechanism, an elaborately designed variable inertia free-sprung balance, and though you can't see it easily here, there's a handmade overcoil hairspring. That overcoil is very rare on Lange watches, being found only on the most chronometry-focused and or premium models in the lineup. You can see the finishing is immaculate. We have black polishing on the swan's neck regulator. We have black polishing on the cap to the escape wheel, as well as the case clamp screws. We also have black polished screws on the regulator and the case clamp, and fired blued screws everywhere else. The bridges and plates are made of German silver, an alloy of nickel copper zinc, with the copper giving it that golden hue. We have a freehand engraved balance cock. You can see we have mirrored anglage on the edge of the bridges. We have pivot jewels set in golden chaton fixed by screws a la pocket watch, and then a 3/4 style bridge, another nod to the pocket watch era of watchmaking in East Germany. So this timepiece is broad and flat, but not nearly as broad as the two that preceded. It's still large by modern dress watch standards at 40.5 millimeters. It has a good presence without being in any way awkward, and it's super slim with a domed bezel, so it will fit underneath the cuff. If you're thinking of something like a Journe Chronometer Bleu, Chronometer Souverain, something like a Ventwheat from Cartier Rotonde, don't ignore the fact that some of the best options are also among the most underrated, and this definitely falls into that category. Not only is the case rose gold, but the dial itself is cut from a solid disc of sterling silver. Lots to love. We've spoken a bit about black polish, and I really need to explain what that means. It means the highest standard of specular finish that you'll find on a watch, whereby the surface is finished off using a diamond paste to create a mirrored shine that only reflects light in one direction, and from every other angle, it looks black. And that's what we have here on this Bethune DB28XP, a 10th anniversary reimagining of the iconic DB28 that won the GPHG Aiguille d'Or back in 2011. This watch is so much thinner than the original that it merits a different case and a different name. So the XP, as I measure it, is 43 millimeters in diameter in grade 5 titanium, but only 8.7 millimeters thick. It has spring-loaded floating lugs, so it'll fit your wrist perfectly. And you can see there's a micro-light engraving applied to the outside of the case, which is surprisingly complex. We have a screw-down bullhead wind, twin barrels, self-adjusting, a patented feature. You cannot accidentally overwind them. 6 days of power reserve. You can see that we have that micro-light engraving on a cap above the base plate that sits inside the movement. And then atop the deltoid-style barrel bridge, we have titanium plates that have been black polished in their own right, with black polished and fire-blued hands and fire-blued balance wheel. The balance wheel is patented. It suffers minimally from changes in temperature, and it puts as much of the mass as possible in the rim of the balance, where it can do the most good for the regularity of the timekeeper. And this is at least the 8th different balance wheel patented by de Bethune's Denis Flageolet. We have 1, 2, 3 shock protection springs, and you'll note that the entire balance bridge has been black polished. There are even sharp interior angles where the arms of the bridge meet the enclosure for the pivot jewel in the center. So the finishing here is everything you would get from the likes of Patek Philippe or Romain Gaultier or Grubel 4C at their peak. You can even see there's a dramatic satination and solarization on the ratchet wheels atop the barrels. On the reverse side, we no longer have the power reserve indicator of a conventional DB28, but that's okay. Tech specs are identical even without it. You get the same amount of power reserve, shock resistance, and chronometric properties. And you could see, because of the variable geometry lugs, we get a great fit as well, even on a small wrist, with a super slim profile that fits easily underneath the cuff. This is a grail watch by any definition. That said, I think this DB27 has even more presence. With a salmon dial that's very subtly printed in blue, we have a blackened zirconium case, so the material itself is super hard, and then an even harder, hard black material is applied via physical vapor deposition. The idea here being that this 43 millimeter floating lug watch is almost impervious to scratches as well as dents, because oftentimes what happens with hard black coating is the coating itself is very hard, but the material underneath, the metal, is soft. By putting a hard zirconium underneath the hard black, you prevent a cracking or eggshell failure where the hard material is pushed into the soft material underneath and then cracks on the surface. So by having hard on hard, you create a nearly impervious, indelible watch. Now this is the Titan Hawk DB27 as it was originally launched back in 2012. Now in 2012, the watch was launched with a pointer-style date, which this has, and an automatic movement with all of the De Bethune toys, including this wonderful patent solid silicone white gold rim balance. It had a 6-day power reserve in its original version. When it was redesigned for 2018, the Titan Hawk went from a automatic winding 6-day power reserve to an automatic winding 60-hour power reserve, which is why I consider the original to be the more desirable. Plus, whereas the Series 2 featured a center seconds, I actually prefer the radial date here. It does come with a quick set as well. 43mm watch, super slim, not as thin as the DB28XP, but still quite slim, well under 13mm. And you can see that the watch is very wearable, again, thanks to those floating lugs. If you like what you see here, reach out to me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com, for purchase and pricing details.